to the introductory podcast for the National Principals Conference in 2021. My name is Jason Heemskirk, and I am a member of the NBC 2021 Convening Committee. During this podcast, we're considering what does it mean to do Reformed education on purpose. And this is introductory podcast where we kind of lay out how we're going to be putting this information together. It's a conversation between John Winia, John Veniprin, Mike Vanderdeen, and myself, where we talk about the different aspects and different things that we're going to be doing and give you a taste of what to expect in the weeks to come. So without any further ado, here is the introductory podcast. Here we are at John's house looking at the, half a foot of snow, John? Roughly?
A little bit more.
Half a foot of snow. And thinking about what it would be nice, how nice it would be to be in BC, where they have tulips blooming, daffodils up, and we're happy we're not in Texas, where they have more snow than we have. But we're here to talk about the NBC Conference 2021, which, Lord willing, will happen in September of this year. And we want to welcome you to this podcast. I'm Jason Heemskirk. I'm part of the NBC 21 Convening Committee. It's a conference where we want to consider what does it mean to have Reformed education? What does it mean to do, Reformed education on purpose? In preparation for this conference, we're planning a series of podcasts to introduce our topic and to get you thinking. Today's podcast is an introduction to the series. And for this podcast, I'm joined with the rest of our community committee, which is John Winia and John Veniprin, Mike Vanderdeen. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Vanderdeen, right, Mike? Yeah. And then I am Jason Heemskirk. And we're just going to start by kind of giving a brief introduction to ourselves and who we are and what we do. And I'm going to start with John. And John, take it away.
Yeah, hi. So I am John Winia. I'm the league coordinator for the League of Canadian Reformed School Societies. I started out teaching at Coaldale Christian School in Alberta. I did 3 years there, and then I came to Brantford, Ontario, and I taught at Hope Reformed Christian School, a small new high school or a K-12 school that started there. And then in 2018, I took over from Jason as the league coordinator for the Canadian Reformed Schools. I was educated at Redeemer University College. I did both my undergrad there and my teacher training there. I currently live in Brantford with my wife and 5 kids. Our oldest is 12 and our youngest is 5, and they are all currently attending Hope Reformed Christian School. So I'm really excited about the topic for the conference, which is Reformed education on purpose. It's a big part of how I see my work, helping teachers and helping schools do what they've set out to do, which is teach kids to live out their faith, to practice their faith. And so, I'm really excited about the conference topic.
All right, thank you. And then we're going to flip it over to John Veniprin, whose kitchen we're sitting in right now. John?
Yes, a little bit about my work experience. I currently am the principal of Cornerstone Christian School here in beautiful Guelph, the Royal City, as it's known. I've done this almost 3 years. My history in work is a little different. I started off in John Calvin School with Jason way back when. And at that point, I forayed into the business world, sold an awful lot of materials to schools throughout Ontario. I probably touched more school boards than I can imagine. Went through Northern Ontario, Southern Ontario, Eastern Ontario. Very interesting experience dealing with principals, directors of education. And I also then spent a lot of time during that time in the boards of schools and being also chair of the board of the school, involved in the league on the other side of the table than we normally sit at. And that brought me to realizing that my passion definitely was still education, and that brought me back into the education world. My education, I started off in Carleton University in public administration, so learning how to be a bureaucrat, and I soon realized that music was more of a passion to myself, so I completed a music degree in Brock University, at which point after that, I attended Covenant Canadian Reformed Teachers College. So kind of a different rounded education, different rounded work experience. Currently, we've moved from Niagara to Guelph. It's been a great experience. We have, my wife and I, we have 6 children, 5 boys, 1 girl. 1 has finished school, and the youngest is currently in grade 2. The topic of Reformed education has always been something that I've been very passionate about because we invest a lot of time and an awful lot of money into having our own schools. So what does that mean? And then how can we accomplish or go about doing it in the best way? And that's essentially why this topic should fuel the fire and fuel the passion again in our schools.
All right, thank you. Mike, flip it over to you.
All right, so I've served at Providence Reformed Collegiate in Kamoka as the principal there for the past 7 years. Before that, I worked at Heritage Christian School in Jordan Station as a junior intermediate teacher. I have my BA, my BEd from Redeemer University, and I'm currently working towards my Master's of Ed at Calvin University. And I live in Mount Bridges near London with my wife and my 4 sons. And my oldest son is going to be joining us at Providence in September. And I don't know what I feel about that yet. I think I'm excited, but I'm also equally nervous. And I look forward to telling you about that at the conference, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. So
You won't know yet.
no,
It'll just be
after a month.
September.
No. I am excited about Reformed education on purpose because I've sometimes wondered that the education that we offer our students, if we actually take for granted that it's Christian or that it's Reformed, that it's offered at our school. And so we say, this is Christian, it is Reformed, but in actual fact, we haven't worked out what that all means. That first crossed my mind when I was an elementary school teacher and I had tons of leeway as to unit design. What are we going to teach? How are we going to teach this? And I've also struggled with it at the secondary level where we teach a prescriptive Ontario curriculum. And I'm concerned about things like bookend Christianity, where we teach a unit where the first lesson is about the perspective on this topic, and then the last test has a question on the perspective, but everything else is secular, and it sounds like the unit that you would get at the public high school down the road. So that's what I'm thinking about. 10 years ago, I did a pilot project at Heritage where we talked about through lines, which was exciting to me because it had a graduate profile, what it means to be a graduate of our school, and then we were intentionally teaching towards that in each of our units. And I like how it takes in Wiggins and McTighe's understanding by design. And if that works in a secular curriculum, understanding by design, then what does that look like in Christian education, Reformed Christian education? So I'm excited to be part of that, and I'm excited to be working with Daryl DeBoer for our podcast series to hear what they're doing with TFT.
So you mentioned Daryl DeBoer as part of that. John, you're working with, who you hope to work with?
Chris DeBoer.
Chris DeBoer, right? So, but it's not just a DeBoer thing because you have someone that's not DeBoer, right?
I
John?
have Doug Sigma.
You have Doug Sigma. And then I'm still working on exactly who I'm going to be looking at. But we're hoping for Stephen Levy with the Expeditionary Learning type thing. So I am Jason Heemskirk. In terms of work experience, I don't know. I've done a number of different things. I started with John at John Calvin School in Smithville, where I taught grade 5, grade 6. They kicked me out, graduated grade 8. Then from there, I moved on to John Calvin's Christian School in Burlington, where I was principal for 6 years, but also taught grade 7, 8, 5, 6, 3, a bit of 1. And then at that point in time, the two schools combined. So I left that. I went to become the first league coordinator, the predecessor to John's job, where we took this vision for what we could do as a League of Canadian Reformed School Societies to support the different schools. And then I worked at that for 3 years, kind of proof of concept. And then we gave it to somebody that actually has a skill set to do it, which is John. And then I took over the job as principal of Guido de Brett Christian High School in Hamilton. And I've been there now seems like for a long time. It's actually only been 2.5 years. But I think in the last year of COVID, it seemed more like 6 years that you're there. And so many different things that we had planned are kind of up in the air. And that, I think, gentlemen, I mean, this is this conference, right? Part of the vision for this conference is driven out of the situation where we're in, where we're not sure whether we'll be able to meet in person or whether we'll be able to get guests flown in or those types of things. So that's where we are. As far as my education is concerned, I went to university for history. That was my bachelor degree. And I realized very quickly that there's nothing really you can do with a history degree except perhaps teach. And so that drove me into Convening Committee Reformed Teachers College, where I enjoyed that year of work. But then after that, much later, I also got my master's in education in terms of administration and leadership. And that stood me in good stead in a number of different ways, also in terms of my various learning opportunities. Personal history, we have, I'm married to a wonderful lady, and she's wonderful because she's married to me. She talks about her patience and her endurance and all those suffering things. We also have 5 children, 3 of whom have finished with high school already. They're all working full-time. One's in school full-time as well as working full-time. And we have 2 more. One's just graduating out of grade 8, Lord willing, in the coming year. So we're kind of on that end of the spectrum, kind of in the midst of things. In terms of why do we do Reformed education on purpose, I think it's something that, for myself, is something that really kind of it's part of the draw to the lead coordinator job in the beginning. But as we move further and further with our communities away from the founding fathers, I think it's more and more important for us to recognize why we do this. Why, as John mentioned earlier, why do we spend the money? Why do we do these different tasks all the time? That's not fair to take pictures when I can't say anything. Why do we do all this stuff together? And I think that especially our younger generation needs to understand that it's not just tradition. That there's actually a purpose to what we do. And that's a purpose that's worth holding on to as we go on. So that's why, for me, Reformed education on purpose is such an important topic, because we need to, as educational leaders, tell the coming generations that what we're doing here is not random tradition, but there's actually a point to it. So, and that's, I think, when we talked as the 4 of us about the topic of this title, we ran through a number of different things, and that's what we landed on. We landed on Reformed education on purpose and what we meant. So we're going to, at NBC 2021, we're hoping to think deeply about how the mission and the vision of our schools connects and directs unit design, lesson planning, pedagogy, the character of education. And we're going to examine 4 different approaches to this, and then carefully consider how these 4 different approaches answer the question: who's the learner? Who is the teacher? What's the purpose of education? And what is the character of education? And then we're going to consider also, of course, the role of the principal in guiding professional practice that reflects and enacts the mission and vision of our schools. That's our kind of core purpose. And we're going to, why this topic? Well, because it's important. It's not random circumstance. It's not, the time of the judges, I think, where we do what's, right in our own eyes. So for myself, that's where it's at. I don't know, gentlemen, if you have other ideas, right? Something else to add to that. That was.
Yeah. So I think for me, there's a lot of calls in Scripture for us to be really careful about how we do things, right? So think of Colossians 3:17, where it talks about whatever we do, do it in the name of the Lord Jesus, or 2 Corinthians 10, it talks about whatever you do, do it to the glory of God. So there's that high call for us to be intentional and to be careful about what we're doing, how we're doing it. And so I think that's really important as it applies to what goes on in the classroom, right? And Mike talked about bookend Christianity in our classrooms. I think there's a risk that we take, that we say, yeah, we have a Christian school, we read the Bible every day, we pray, and yet we kind of do things the same way as the public school does them, or maybe if we're thinking about the Christian school down the road, and it's not really a uniquely reformed kind of Christian education that we're offering. And it's important for us to think about, as Reformed Christians who say we live for the glory of God, we live according to his word. It's important for us to think about what that looks like practically in the classroom.
In a conversation that I had with the principal of a school, he talked about how they were looking at their membership policy. What were they going to do for their school? And they were actually thinking about opening up their Reformed Christian school to become a wider school community. And there was concern when they opened it up that it would become a watered down Christianity. And what he said is the impact of that decision was actually the opposite, because as a school, they decided we really have to grind out all of our intentionalities. What actually does it mean that we are a Reformed Christian school? And they thought long and hard about what it means. And they understood from that exercise that before they had taken much of that for granted, what it was to actually provide a Reformed Christian education. Because it was a Reformed Christian school, therefore the education was Reformed and it was Christian. And when they realized that they had something to protect, they realized they could also grow that, develop it, do it better. And he said, we are now a more Reformed Christian school as an open school than when we had a closed enrollment. That's not me advocating for open enrollment, but it is.
Yes, it is.
No, it isn't. No, not at all. But I think as schools, we are associations of parents who want this kind of an education for our students, not just by our enrollment, but also because the quality and the design of our education is intentionally reformed, and it has that kind of impact on our students.
Yeah, we at Cornerstone are going through the language arts curriculum document that CARE has given us. And one of the things that has become clear with the staff is they agree that the content of this document, and it talks about how we teach language arts as Reformed schools, is very important. And they say, yeah, this all makes sense to us. And I think igniting the passion in your staff to understand why we're doing what we're doing, and then connecting that to the how. How do you go about that in daily life in an easy way? I think that's where we're trying to go with this conference, and figure out how we can empower our staff, our culture in our school to embrace
right. And we're not
method of teaching.
And we're not alone in that in terms of Reformed Christian schools. And I think that's part of the vision for this, is to explore these other, I don't know if you call them methodologies or ideologies or something like that, where there is a purpose. One of the things we talked about was these methodologies, or when you're doing different things, including teaching in or setting up Reformed Christian schools, is there's a problem you're trying to solve. There's something that you've seen in kind of what's currently offered, and you say, well, you know what, this is where it falls short, and this is how we're going to solve that particular problem. And that's part of the reason why we've chosen these four different perspectives that we're going to go through in a few minutes. But the idea then is for us, this is an introductory podcast. It's here to kind of wet the whistle. We've done that earlier already. But the idea is to kind of give you a sense of where we're going. But before we get into that, let me talk a little bit about what the conference itself is going to look like. So we've chosen our four different areas, and we understand that there's more than four areas. We chose four areas that we feel have some impact, especially in terms of the kind of Christian ideology surrounding education, the four that we've been looking at. And we hope that at some point in time to kind of draw that out in our work. And so what we've done is we're planning on setting up podcasts, 4 podcasts. John's going to do one, Mike's going to do one, John Winnie's going to do another one, and I'm going to also complete one. And then we're going to send those out as 4 different podcast files for you to utilize as you go forward. That way, before, hopefully in June, that's the plan. We're going to have these 4 files for you to listen to over the summer, and for you to, if you have a hard time sleeping, you can put it on. You can just right to bed. that'll be mine. The rest of them are just riveting. You won't be able to sleep at all. But this is kind of what we're doing. And then the idea was during the MPC, we use that as our core learning, I guess, that we're gonna span from. So the 4 individuals that we've interviewed for our podcasts are going to be back with us at MPC virtually. So they'll be kind of Zooming in or Google Meeting in or whatever whatever software we're going to be using for that. And then they're going to kind of take your questions. So you've listened to these podcasts, you've heard them answer the questions, and then they'll be able to take your questions and then allow us to explore these different methodologies, these different visions for education as we go forward. Then we'll have some looking at our group. We're going to draft kind of perspective statements. So we're going to, who we are as people, right? Mike, I think you may be better to kind of take over this and put you on the spot here. So the vision for these perspective statements would be the fact that we create something, correct?
Right. Yeah, because we want for the conference to have actionable items afterwards. What are we going to do with these things? It's important that we don't just talk about these 4 design frameworks at the conference, but it's important that we leave from here saying, what are we going to do? How can this have an impact on our school? So having an opportunity to work on perspective statements or an opportunity to work on analysis or questions or next steps creates the actionable items that we can leave the conference with.
That idea of that we don't define ourselves by we're not that. So it's like the Canadian definition, Canadian identity. Well, we're not American. This is the idea, right? Yeah. John, does it sound fair?
Yeah. So I think we want to listen to these different presenters. They're going to talk about their different models for understanding, to hear, and to learn from them, but to also then apply it to our own situation and say, okay, so what might this look like now? We talk about applying biblical reform principles to pedagogy, practices that are going on in a classroom on a daily basis. What positive vision can we have based on some of this foundational kind of thinking that we're going to unpack from the different presenters through the questions that we're hoping to ask them?
What I also like about this is that it creates something that we've accomplished at the end of our conference that can be shared. Our podcasts will be shared as well to our communities. That's what we're planning on. But then it would be really good for the work of the conference, the principals at the conference, for that also to be shared so that there's some digestion that's happened and something that's been worked out. So
you use it for your adcoms, like just as you kind of work to get people to understand what we're trying to do with our schools, right? To look at these different options and to do those different things.
Yeah, and as we've talked about it with staff and with various people kind of introducing the concept to them, they're really excited for the conversation and for the the potential to work with this topic and think about it more deeply as a reformed educator. Educational leaders, educational thinkers, that kind of thing.
And it's not going to be just these podcasts. These podcasts will be part of it, and probably the bulk of it. But we also hope to, we're going to be having Reverend Winia coming in. He's going to be talking about challenging students to live lives of holiness, and then how the school fits in that. Right, this idea of the fact that we have a unifying purpose with the church in the home. What's the school's role in challenging students to live lives of holiness? And then we're also going to have Leonard DeVisser coming in, and he's a teacher currently at PRC, and he's going to talk about some of the practical aspects. Mike, I think that's correct, right? Like he's some of the practical aspects of
right. Yeah, teachers at Providence have been working with some of these ideas in the past year, and Leonard's been doing some good work with this, or great work with this, and we've asked if he'd be willing to share what this actually looks like in a classroom for him to be thinking about education in that way. So he's eager to come and to explain. So we look forward to his presentation at the conference.
Yeah, and that'll bring us a ton of food for thought as we as we go forward. There's gonna be a lot to digest, a lot to put in. But now we're at this point where we kind of get to, I don't know, is it the big reveal where we talk about the different perspectives that we're going to be going from? And so what we're going to do now is we're basically going to give the floor to each of our NPC organizers, and each one has been given a topic for a podcast where they interview someone to talk about a certain philosophy or certain methodology, ideology of education. And so what we're going to do is we're going to time it out. Each of them have 1 minute to talk about their. Mike, you're going to time it.
We're really just timing for you, Jason.
It's all a spade.
Let's be honest. One person
I was trying
a timer.
No, not just one person here. Mike is sitting on the opposite side of the table from me. We both love our voices. So this is the way that works.
This is where Mike wants to be the timer.
Mike, that's right. So the watch goes
to start it.
That's right. The watch is slower for Mike.
Alternatively, you could just put Jason speaking on like 1.5 time playback. It goes a little bit faster.
All right. Thank you. I think for that. So let's go in then. John, you according to the list that Mike made. John, you're first, and you're going to be talking about what?
Yeah. So I'm going to be talking about classical Christian education with Doug Sycama. So Doug is actually my cousin, and he has, in the last couple of years, started a classical Christian school in Ancaster, Ontario. Classical education is a really a big model. It's used throughout, especially the States. It's been really resurgent. So if you know people like Doug Wilson is a big champion of Reformed or of classical Christian education. And there's also people, we were talking earlier on the table about Rod Dreher. Rod Dreher says that the option for Christian education in the 21st century is classical Christian education. So it's definitely a very popular and sort of well-known, at least ostensibly well-known approach to Christian education. It's definitely made a lot of inroads in homeschooling communities as well. I think for me, classical Christian education is interesting because it's a very unique and distinct approach, right? It's something that's been thought out sort of from top to bottom, right? It's got a methodology. It's got it focuses very strongly and stringently on the type of content that you're covering, how you're going to cover it, when you're going to cover it. So I think that's unique. So I'm excited to talk to Doug about that. In terms of my own interest in classical Christian education, I was going to say this earlier, but I'm also a history and English background person, and read some stuff from Doug Wilson on classical Christian education, and he talks about how history is really meant to be the spine that holds all of our learning together. So classical Christian education is really built on sort of a historical unfolding of things. You learn concepts in sort of the historical order that they were developed. So that history is really a basis for it. And then if you think about classical Christian education being...
See, and people are worried about me with my minute. Just let
classical
you know.
Christian education being... I've got like 3 seconds of stuff here to say. Being like... about rhetoric and logic, those are really big grammatical concepts. So
this is the problem. You get these 4 educators sitting around the table, and we know lots about lots of things, but not how to keep things to a minute.
I'm done.
All right, so now it's my challenge. So I'm going to be looking at expeditionary learning. Now, expeditionary learning is it's a design model, really, and it was the product of Harvard, actually, and some other organizations that put together. And again, sort of like Christian or like classical education, it has a real particular purpose, and there's these 10 kind of design things that it's based around, which I don't have time to get into right now. But if you're looking at it, what they really want to do is to make sure that education is real for the students. So it's not prescriptive in terms of this is the set curriculum, and this is we have to get through this particular content in order to get there. But rather, they're looking at how do you take real issues that are happening in the real lives of students and in schools, and how do you use those to create an educational system that is that's going to have a purpose, and they want to prioritize these critical thinking. They want to prioritize social justice. They want to prioritize environmental consciousness, and being stewards in the world and in the communities around them. And different schools have taken this in different directions, including Christian schools who've adopted this particular model. And so what we're going to be really interested in this podcast series is, how does expeditionary learning, how does it work inside a Christian school model to have a very purposeful vision for the outcomes of the school that we're going to have. That's my minute.
And a half.
All right, very good. And I'm going to be talking about teaching for transformation. And let's not get hung up on the name of that, but let's just looking at the history of it. It started with a bunch of teachers in the Edmonton area who were concerned with a bookend Christianity, actually. And so they thought, how are we actually going to be intentional? I think they had read Wiggins McTighe's Understanding by Design. And they, from there, said, if our goal is for our students to grow as Christians and to graduate as Christians, then how does that come out in each unit? And that became their design. And then as those teachers read more things like Jamie Smith and thinking about his book, Desiring the Kingdom, they added more core practices. So 3 core practices that you'll hear in Teaching for Transformation. One is through lines, so teaching from a graduate profile. Number 2 is storyline. How do we see each unit designed from the basis of creation, fall, redemption, restoration? And then thirdly, a core practice of formational learning experiences, putting it into practice. And that gets packaged in TFT. And so a lot of schools at West are using that in Iowa and starting to spread into Ontario.
All right.
That's my minute.
Thank you. Also, a minute and a bit, but less than John and less than me. So go ahead, John.
All right. So if the trend is shorter, I'll see what I can do. I remember attending the Teachers College and having a course on Reformed education from Mr. Vandervan at the time. Jason can probably remember that as well. And one of the first questions that he put at the beginning of the course is, what is Reformed education? And I remember him with a twinkle in his eye. And at one point we were quite frustrated with him. And we said to him, what is the definition of Reformed education? And he has left us since then, but he's never told us what the definition of what Reformed education is. And his legacy is that it's something that we need to think deeply about and, constantly check what our definition is and make sure that we have that best definition and how to carry it out. So I think that the Reformed Markers of Education was born, I think, in a 2003 report for a curriculum coordinator. That's where it first surfaced. And I think since then, it's been in many handbooks of schools, saying that our education should be covenantal, it should be confessional, it should be antithetical, and it should have a unity of purpose, realizing that we work with parents in helping them fulfill their covenant obligations. And I think we're going to explore that and see how that's carried out and how it can be carried out the most effectively. And I think that the Reformed markers are probably very well adopted across Ontario, and I don't know how much further than that. So we hope to explore that further in our podcast.
And then the idea is, throughout these 4 different ideas and these 4 different concepts, we have kind of an interview model that we're going to be looking at, and we're going to be asking other questions too. But the 4 kind of key things we're looking at for each of these models is, what's your vision of the learner? Who is the person that's kind of sitting in the desks or wandering the town and the countryside, depending on the model that you're using? Who's the teacher? What's the role of the teacher? What does that look like? And then what's the purpose of education, or Christian education especially? What's its kind of core goal? And then the last one is, what's the character of that education? And we'll kind of unpack what we mean by character as we go through. We've had lots of discussions around this table going there. And that brings us to kind of the end of our intro. Unless we've missed anything, gentlemen, I think we're looking forward to really meeting together the MPC has been a wonderful blessing, at least in my principal career, being able to get together with everybody, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you all again and sitting down and having these discussions at 3 a.m. throughout the conference. So, gentlemen, anything you want to leave the group with?
Yeah, I look forward to these podcasts and these interviews. I think there's lots to say. I think there's lots that this will engage our conference people with. I think it'll engage our school boards and committees and our staff. So I'm really excited about what we're trying to accomplish with the conference.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to the conversations that we're going to have, not only with our podcast guests, but also then following up on that with principals at the conference. So should be good.
Okay, then signing off, John, Mike, and Jay. That's a nice ring to it. Have to make John's going to do some sort of musical introduction for us, and we'll see if he can't base that off of that or popping corks or something. So that's it. We will see you in September, Lord willing.